Have you ever loved someone who seemed to run every time things got too close? Someone who looked calm on the outside, but carried silent storms within? The truth is, when an avoidant starts to fall in love, it doesn't look like closeness. It looks like conflict. But if you can see through their silence, you'll realize something powerful is happening beneath it. Love is rewriting fear. The shift from avoidance to vulnerability in someone with an avoidant attachment style is not a sudden or loud transformation. It's a quiet, almost invisible evolution that takes place beneath the surface of their emotional defenses. For most of their life, they've relied on distance as protection. Space was their safety, independence their shield. They learned early that closeness often came with pain, unpredictability, or rejection. So, when love enters their life, it doesn't immediately feel like warmth or comfort. It feels like danger. To them, emotional intimacy threatens the balance they've worked so hard to maintain. Yet, when an avoidant person begins to truly love, something profound begins to stir inside them. They start to experience a pull that challenges every rule they once built their life around. At first, this pull confuses them. Love feels like both longing and fear wrapped together. Their instinct is to retreat, to restore the emotional distance that keeps them feeling safe. But when someone truly reaches them, not by demanding closeness, but by offering patience and emotional consistency, the avoidant begins to lower their guard, bit by bit. This is the first real shift. When the person who once hid behind composure begins to reveal glimpses of vulnerability. It could be a moment where their voice softens when they talk about something painful, or when they allow silence instead of withdrawing. It might be as simple as them choosing to stay in a difficult conversation instead of escaping it. These small acts may seem insignificant, but for someone who's spent their life running from emotional exposure, they're monumental. This change doesn't come from external pressure. It emerges from internal conflict. Love forces them to confront parts of themselves they've long kept buried: the need for comfort, the fear of abandonment, the desire to be known. They begin to realize that connection doesn't have to mean control, and closeness doesn't always lead to pain. The avoidant mind wrestles with this realization like a paradox it cannot easily resolve. They are both terrified and fascinated by the intimacy they're beginning to feel, and while their old patterns may still surface, pulling away, going quiet, or seeming indifferent, underneath it all lies a growing sense of trust. The very fact that they are trying to stay, despite their discomfort, is evidence of love in motion. When they start to let their partner see them as they are, without the armor of perfection or detachment, it's a sign that their walls are softening. They may begin to share thoughts they never spoke before, open up about their fears, or express emotions in unpolished, awkward ways. Vulnerability for an avoidant person often looks messy because it's unfamiliar territory. It's like learning a new language where every word feels risky. But if you pay attention, you'll see that each attempt to be honest, each effort to stay present, is their way of saying, "I'm trying to trust you." These moments are the foundation of emotional intimacy, though they may not look romantic in the traditional sense. The truth is, avoidants don't fall in love through grand declarations. They fall in love through surrender, through the quiet courage of showing what they once believed they had to hide. They begin to realize that being seen doesn't always lead to pain, and that vulnerability can be a bridge instead of a wound. Love becomes the safe experiment through which they learn that intimacy and autonomy can coexist. So, when you start to see this shift, when the guarded one begins to reveal their softer edges, it's not confusion or inconsistency. It's the beginning of their heart learning a new rhythm, one that moves not in fear, but in trust. When an avoidant person begins to love deeply, they often find themselves at war with their own instincts. Everything in them that once screamed for distance starts to clash with an equally powerful urge to stay close. This inner struggle is not a sign of confusion or indecision. It's a rebellion against the old psychological patterns that once kept them safe. For years, their mind was programmed to equate intimacy with danger. Love, for them, was never simple. It was a battlefield where closeness meant losing control, where vulnerability was weakness, and where independence was survival. But when genuine emotional connection begins to awaken something inside them, that old system starts to crack. They begin to question their own reflexes, to hesitate before pulling away, to notice the dissonance between what they feel and what they fear. This rebellion is rarely visible on the surface. You might not see loud declarations or dramatic changes. Instead, it shows up in subtle shifts, a hesitation before they shut down, a softer tone in their voice after conflict, a willingness to listen even when they feel overwhelmed. It's the quiet resistance of someone rewriting their emotional programming in real time. Each moment they choose connection over withdrawal, they are defying years of conditioning. This isn't easy. Their nervous system interprets intimacy as threat, so staying close to someone they care about can feel physically uncomfortable. Yet, they persist, because love is slowly teaching them that safety can exist within closeness, not only in solitude. Inside, this process feels like a tug-of-war. One part of them yearns to open up, to feel the warmth of belonging, while another part panics, desperate to retreat to the familiar comfort of distance. It's a constant negotiation between fear and desire, between survival and surrender. When an avoidant begins to care deeply, they start noticing that the walls they built to protect themselves are now the very things preventing them from experiencing the depth they secretly crave. They begin to realize that real strength isn't found in isolation, but in the courage to risk connection. This realization is painful because it forces them to face the truth that much of their past safety was rooted in avoidance, not peace. What makes this transformation so profound is that it's not driven by external influence. It's an internal awakening. No one can force an avoidant person to love differently. They must decide it's time to stop running. Love acts as a mirror, reflecting back both their fears and their potential for growth. When they begin to see that intimacy doesn't have to consume them, something inside shifts. They start to act against their instinct, not because they no longer feel fear, but because they've found something worth being afraid for. That's the rebellion, the choice to stay even when every cell in their body tells them to leave. This rebellion against avoidance is a slow, silent act of courage. It's them texting back instead of disappearing. It's them saying, "I need a little space," instead of vanishing into silence. It's them returning after an argument instead of pretending nothing happened. These small actions are revolutions in their inner world. They may still retreat at times, but each return carries meaning. Every time they come back, they prove to themselves that connection doesn't destroy them, it grounds them. And that realization is the beginning of healing. Through this ongoing internal battle, love becomes both their greatest fear and their greatest teacher. It forces them to confront the shadow side of their independence, the loneliness beneath it, the longing they tried to suppress. The moment they begin choosing presence over protection, they are no longer avoiding love. They are becoming capable of it. And though the process is slow, uncertain, and often painful, it marks the most authentic transformation an avoidant can experience. The quiet revolution where the walls begin to fall, not because someone tore them down, but because they finally chose to open the door from within. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, love doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, through small gestures that often go unnoticed by others. Their way of expressing affection rarely fits the usual image of romance. They do not flood you with words, nor do they constantly seek closeness. Instead, their love lives in the subtle consistency, reliability, effort, and presence that doesn't demand attention. To understand them, you have to learn to read between the lines, to feel the message behind their restraint. When an avoidant person begins to love, they may not say, "I love you" often, but they will start to show it in ways that feel grounded, genuine, and real. This kind of love is expressed in action, not performance. They might remember the smallest details about you, how you take your coffee, the way you get quiet when something bothers you, or the things that make you feel safe. For someone who has always valued distance, paying attention to another person so closely is already an act of surrender. It means they are allowing someone into their mental space, and that's a place they rarely let anyone enter. They may start doing small things to make your life easier, helping with a task, being there when you need them, or simply showing up consistently. To most people, these things might seem ordinary, but for an avoidant, they are extraordinary signs of love. They show love by maintaining stability, by becoming a safe and predictable presence in your life. This is because consistency feels like a manageable form of intimacy. It allows them to stay close without losing themselves. Grand romantic gestures, on the other hand, make them feel exposed and vulnerable. So instead of chasing emotional highs, they express care through reliability and quiet support. You may notice that they begin to include you in their routines, to open small parts of their private world. That's their version of invitation. It's their way of saying, "You matter enough to exist within my comfort zone." Words for them are tricky. They've learned that saying too much can lead to dependence or emotional exposure, so they measure what they express carefully. This doesn't mean they don't feel deeply. In fact, they often feel more than they can articulate. Their silence is not emptiness, it's protection. When they start sharing small pieces of themselves, talking about a childhood memory, a dream, or even an insecurity, it's not random conversation. It's a signal that they are beginning to trust that their feelings are safe with you. The process may be slow, but each word shared is a brick removed from the wall they've built around their heart. Their love also shows up in moments of contradiction. They may act distant after a particularly close or emotional interaction. This withdrawal doesn't mean they don't care. It's simply their nervous system recalibrating. Intimacy feels intense, and they need space to process it. But the key difference, when they're truly falling in love, is that they return. They come back after the silence. They don't disappear completely, because the bond they're forming has begun to outweigh their fear. Love is teaching them a new rhythm: approach, retreat, return, and stay a little longer each time. They will also begin to show subtle protectiveness, though not in possessive ways. They'll start considering how their actions affect you. They'll check in more often. They'll try to keep promises even when it's uncomfortable. For them, keeping a promise is a deep expression of love. It represents stability, the very thing they once feared giving away. They are learning that commitment doesn't have to mean confinement. It can mean trust. Understanding an avoidant person's love requires patience and emotional sensitivity. Their affection doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself through the small details of presence, reliability, and quiet effort. Where others might use words, they use actions. Where others might seek closeness, they offer steadiness. They love not by overwhelming you with attention, but by showing up in ways that matter most when you least expect it. And though their love may seem understated, it carries a sincerity few can match, because every gesture is a choice, a conscious defiance of fear, and a quiet confession of the heart. When an avoidant person pulls away, it often looks like rejection, but beneath that distance lies a deep and tangled fear. To understand an avoidant attachment, you have to look beyond their behavior and into the emotional history that shaped it. Many avoidants learned early in life that closeness could be painful, unpredictable, or conditional. They may have experienced love that came with control, neglect, or inconsistency, and so they adapted by learning that safety meant self-reliance. To them, emotional distance wasn't a lack of love, it was protection from disappointment. This fear doesn't disappear when they fall in love. In fact, it intensifies. The more they care, the more vulnerable they feel, and the more likely they are to retreat. What looks like indifference is often a shield for panic, the panic of being seen, of losing control, of needing someone too much. Avoidance fear being consumed by intimacy. Deep connection threatens their sense of independence, which they've come to equate with safety. They might start to care for someone, then suddenly pull back, becoming cold or distant. This is not because their feelings vanish, but because their system becomes overwhelmed by the intensity of closeness. Their mind tells them that distance will restore control, that withdrawing will keep them safe from potential hurt. Yet, paradoxically, this very withdrawal is what often brings them pain. They crave connection as much as they fear it, and this inner contradiction keeps them locked in cycles of approach and retreat. When they love someone deeply, these cycles become even more pronounced. Inside their emotional world, love triggers a flood of conflicting messages. On one side, there's the longing to be seen, held, and understood. On the other, there's the terror that closeness will lead to loss or engulfment. Their fear is not of love itself, it's of what love might take away. They fear losing their identity, their autonomy, or the control that once kept them safe. So when they begin to feel deeply attached, they instinctively create distance as a way to manage the vulnerability that love awakens in them. This is why they may suddenly go quiet after an intimate conversation, or why they seem emotionally detached right after expressing affection. It's their nervous system reacting, not their heart closing. The tragedy of avoidant fear is that it often hides genuine affection. They may think they're protecting themselves, but in doing so, they protect themselves from the very closeness they desire. Deep down, they want to trust love, but trust requires surrender, and surrender feels like danger. When they find someone who sees beyond their defenses, someone who doesn't interpret their distance as disinterest, but as fear, they begin to soften. Slowly, they realize that closeness doesn't have to mean losing themselves. It can mean being seen and accepted as they are. But this understanding takes time because their fear runs deeper than logic. It's wired into the emotional memory of their early relationships. What helps an avoidant person move through this fear is safety. Emotional safety that isn't forced or demanded, but consistently offered. When they see that love doesn't demand their constant availability, that they can take space and still be accepted, the panic begins to ease. Over time, their instinct to withdraw weakens, replaced by a growing desire to stay present, even when it's uncomfortable. They begin to see that vulnerability doesn't always lead to pain, and that needing someone isn't the same as losing themselves. This shift marks the beginning of emotional healing. Their fear of intimacy is really a fear of being hurt again, of repeating a story they never wanted to live twice. When they start to feel safe enough to remain close, even when afraid, that's when love begins to transform them. What once was a wall becomes a bridge. What once was silence becomes a quiet form of trust. And what once was fear starts to turn into courage. The courage to stay open in the presence of love, even when every part of them still trembles at the thought of being seen. Patience is the bridge that allows love to reach the heart of an avoidant. For someone who has spent most of their life retreating from closeness, patience is not just kindness, it's healing in motion. Avoidant individuals move slowly when it comes to trust, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too deeply. Every step toward intimacy for them is like stepping into unknown territory where past fears linger. They need time to observe, to feel safe enough to believe that love will not turn into control, rejection, or emotional chaos. Patience becomes the language through which they begin to understand that they can be loved without being consumed. It tells them that they don't need to hide or perform, that love can exist without conditions or threats. When someone walks away the moment an avoidant starts to open, it reinforces the very story they've carried all their lives, that closeness always ends in loss. They retreat further into themselves, convinced that vulnerability only leads to pain. But when patience meets them instead of punishment, a new story begins to form. They start to see that love can stay even when they falter, even when they pull away, even when they can't yet reciprocate fully. This kind of patience doesn't mean tolerating emotional neglect or sacrificing one's own needs. It means holding space for the reality that deep emotional change takes time. It means recognizing that for someone who fears intimacy, love is not a straight path, but a gradual unfolding. The process of transformation in an avoidant happens slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. They might inch forward and then retreat again. They might open up in one moment and go silent the next. To the impatient heart, this can feel like rejection. But beneath those fluctuations lies progress. Each return after withdrawal, each effort to communicate, each moment of vulnerability, however small, is evidence that something inside them is changing. Patience allows this growth to take root. It gives them room to fail and still feel accepted, which in turn teaches them that they no longer need to armor themselves to be loved. In the presence of patient love, the avoidant begins to internalize a new experience, one where love is not a threat, but a source of safety. They start to realize that they can take emotional risks without losing themselves. This realization doesn't come through words, but through consistent actions, through the quiet steadiness of someone who doesn't run when things get hard. When love waits without forcing, when it listens instead of demanding, when it stays steady instead of reactive, it begins to rewire how the avoidant perceives closeness. They start to see that connection doesn't mean suffocation and that they can maintain their independence while being emotionally bonded. This patience becomes a mirror that reflects back a different truth, that love can coexist with freedom. For the avoidant, this is revolutionary. It dismantles the belief that relationships always end in loss of self. With time, they learn that their space will be respected, that they can come and go emotionally without fear of abandonment, and that their presence is enough. This trust cannot be rushed. It has to be earned slowly through understanding and emotional consistency. When patience is present, love transforms from a battlefield into a sanctuary. The avoidant, once accustomed to withdrawal as a form of protection, begins to approach instead. They learn that love does not demand perfection. It only asks for honesty and willingness. As they experience patience not as pity, but as acceptance, they start to mirror it back. They become gentler, more open, more forgiving toward themselves and others. In that space, connection deepens naturally, and what once was fear begins to dissolve into gratitude. It's not about fixing them, but about giving them time to trust that they never needed fixing to be worthy of love. And when that realization takes root, love finally becomes what it was always meant to be, not a test, not a threat, but a safe place to return to, again and again. When you begin to understand the heart of an avoidant, you stop mistaking their distance for indifference. You start to see that every moment they choose to stay, every word they struggle to say, every small act of care is their way of reaching beyond fear. Love for them is not effortless. It's a conscious, daily act of courage. They are learning that closeness does not have to cost them their freedom, that trust can exist without control, and that vulnerability can be strength, not weakness. The shift within an avoidant is never loud. It's quiet, steady, and deeply human. It's found in the way they stop running from connection and begin walking toward it, even with trembling steps. When you see that shift, when the walls start to soften, when their eyes begin to hold your presence instead of avoiding it, don't walk away. That's not their confusion. That's their love. It's not the absence of fear. It's the decision to love despite it. Real love doesn't just heal the open-hearted. It heals the guarded too. And when an avoidant starts to trust, to stay and to show up not because they must, but because they choose to, you're witnessing one of the rarest forms of love there is. It's love born from awakening, the moment a once protected heart finally realizes it's safe to be seen.